Hello, and welcome back to our read through of the entire Bible in 2026. We are heading into the third week of March, and so this week we are starting in the book of 1 Samuel and reading from chapter 1 to chapter 22 over the course of this week. Now, the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel start off kind of at the tail end of the time of the Judges, of the book of Judges. And so it actually starts off with 1 Samuel talking about a woman named Hannah who is praying that she can have a child and then promises to give that child back to God as long as he would give her a child. And God hears her prayer. And so she gives birth to a boy named Samuel, after whom the book is named. And as he starts to grow older, she actually sends him and makes him a Nazirite, where he has to follow certain traditions where he's not allowed to touch anything dead, he's not allowed to drink wine, and most famously for Nazirites, they're not allowed to cut their hair, like Samson. And he ends up working in the tabernacle with the priests under the care of the high priest Eli. Now, at that time, Samuel actually starts to hear the voice of God. One night he's asleep and he hears God calling to him, "Samuel, Samuel." And at first he thinks it's Eli. But as it becomes clear, as he keeps hearing this, he's learning to hear and understand God's voice, and he starts getting set up as one of the first of the prophets who holds the office of prophet. Now, during most of the book of 1 Samuel, Israel is at war with the Philistines. Time and time and time again, they are fighting the Philistines. And so there's this quick aside where the Philistines come in and they actually kill most of the priests and they capture the Ark of the Covenant from the tabernacle. And they actually put it in the temple of their god Dagon. And when they come back the next morning, Dagon's statue is falling over, bowing to the Ark of the Covenant, to the throne of God. And they set Dagon back up, and again, he bows to it overnight, and this time his head is broken off and his hands are broken off. And so the Philistines actually send the ark back to Israel. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They think this thing is cursed. Now, at this point in time, Samuel is starting to grow old, and he is called one of the judges. He is the last of the judges. But he's not acting like a warlord like a lot of the other judges were. He is acting more as a prophet. He travels around, he preaches, he teaches, and he helps people understand what God wants. But as he gets older, his own kids aren't really following after God the way he is. And so Israel says, rather than going back and having God raise up another judge for us in another so many years, why can't you give us a king? And so what ends up happening is in chapter 8, Israel demands that they have a king set over them, someone who will be put in charge, and their reign will be passed down through their family, and then they can build up an army and defend the people from all their enemies. And in chapter 9, Samuel chooses a young man, a donkey herder, named Saul. And he meets him alongside of the road as Saul is off looking for some runaway donkeys, and he anoints him with oil. And it says that at that time, God gave Saul a new heart, as if he's changing how Saul thinks, how Saul acts. Saul begins to prophesy, so Saul is counted among the prophets. And in chapter 10, after this happens, they come back and Samuel actually has this whole coronation ceremony where Saul is proclaimed king. And as the people begin to accept Saul, he starts having military victory after military victory after military victory. And so eventually Samuel gives his big farewell address to Israel and is going to leave things in the care of Saul. Except then it gets to this point where Saul starts having trouble. And at one point, Saul says, well, I'm not going to let any man in my army eat anything until we defeat the Philistines, which just logistically is a problem. And then his son, Jonathan, who's one of his generals, doesn't know of this proclamation and accidentally eats something, and Saul doesn't put Jonathan to death like he swore to do. And then there's times where Saul is supposed to go and defeat different people groups, and specifically the Amalekites, and he fails to destroy everything as God had told him to do. And when Samuel comes to check on him, he says, wait, your people are taking plunder from the Amalekites. The Amalekite king is still alive. You're holding him hostage. You haven't followed what God has said. And so it is determined there by God that he is going to replace Saul with a better king, a man after his own heart. And we meet who this man is in chapter 16, where Samuel goes to the little town of Bethlehem and meets with one of the elders, Jesse, who has 12 sons, and none of the 12 sons are called to be king, but then they go and they get the youngest, the 13th son. And he, David, who keeps the sheep, is chosen to be king, and he's anointed, and it says the Spirit of God rushed upon him from that day forward. And so David is chosen to be king, and David enters into Saul's service originally as a musician to help calm Saul's nerves, because Saul has an evil spirit that is starting to torment him. And then David gets to prove himself in battle when Goliath, the Philistines come up and they have this giant Goliath everyone is scared to fight, and David stands up and says, I will go fight him. Now David's just a young man, and Goliath is a battle-hardened warrior and a giant, and David defeats him not with sword or spear, and even though David uses a sling and a stone, it's not that which defeats Goliath. It is the work and the power of God, and David makes that very clear. And so David doesn't take the glory for himself. He gives it to God, and David then becomes one of Saul's generals, and he goes off and he fights people, and he is promised to marry Saul's daughter. But then Saul realizes that David can take away his kingdom. And so then he starts trying to kill David. And this happens several times, and even though David and Jonathan become good friends, David has to flee, and Jonathan helps him get away from Saul. Now, David goes on the run. He takes some of his own men with him. They go to the tabernacle and they take away the bread that only the priests are supposed to eat. And he goes and he's hiding in a cave. And when Saul learns that the priests helped David, he has them killed. So Saul is now very much working against everything God is standing for. And David, the true anointed king of Israel, is in hiding in exile in caves.